All right, so this is chapter 19, early Latin America. Now, for a little bit of this, we have to do some time traveling. It's not really time traveling, it's just review. Because to do early Latin America, we first have to go back before the white folks show up. So the beginning of chapter 19, if you read it, and how many of you read it? Okay, not bad. It may have been a little confusing because it seemed like you went back to chapter 11. Like they're talking about Aztecs and whatnot. It's because in order for you to understand what happens next, you have to remember what life was like before any European set foot in the Western Hemisphere. And so this chapter is all about that contrast. What life was like before, Europeans show up, what's life like now? Because obviously this is a huge change. This is like if, aliens ever show up. We're going to look back on it and go, wow, we had all this time where we didn't know about aliens, we'd never seen aliens. Aliens show up, what do we do now? Life will be totally different. For the natives in the Western Hemisphere, that's what it was. These were aliens. These were totally different people from a totally different culture, and they didn't even know these people existed.
All they knew was you're seeing this us.
Well, they got arms and legs. It's not like they got their heads in a funny place or their eyes in their bellies or something. But, different skin tone, different hair color, different eye color. These white people have all these weird dots, freckles, on their faces. Like, what's up with that? Totally different languages that have no common root at all. Fundamentally different worldviews, views of God, ways of living, clothing, tool. Like, nothing is the same. It's weird. And now they have to find a way to live together. It really is. It really is a wonder they got along well at all. And really, they don't for the most part, other than in a few unique situations. Some of the early colonies, you guys learned about this in elementary and middle school. What happens with the earliest settlements here in North America? Yeah, the natives actually help them out. And then they start fighting. Right, then they kill them. Right. All right, so that's kind of the viewpoint that you want to have with all this, is that this is a fundamental change in life for everybody that's on this side of the world. All right, so we got to do a couple things first. We have to figure out where we're talking about. And at the beginning, we're talking about two different European nations doing most of this work, Portugal and Spain. So let's start. Where are Portugal's colonies? Where do they colonize? Stephen? What's that? Which Indies? The ones to the right, the East Indies. All right, so a large portion of Portugal's colonies will be over here. Where else does Portugal have colonies? Nick? Brazil. Hannah, where else? You were going to say Brazil. Michael, what did you say? Africa. Good. They set up places all along the west coast of Africa. Where else? Yes, they do. All right, so when you look at Portugal, Portugal has a very, very diverse set of colonial possessions. What does Spain have?
West Indies.
West Indies, what else? Mexico, especially after Cortez takes out the Aztecs. What else?
Peru.
Okay. What do you notice that's different? Spain has a lot in terms of square footage.
Not a lot in terms of stuff for sure.
What do you mean, Nick?
There isn't any large established civilization in the area like the Portuguese have with the trade.
Excellent.
The Indians and
Excellent. The Spanish do not have colonies in any place where there is already a significant, established, sophisticated civilization. They got a whole bunch of land, but there ain't much on it. It's going to take work to develop this into something profitable. What does Portugal have? Yeah, Portugal has less space, but it's more heavily developed. There are kingdoms already in existence on the west coast of Africa that the Portuguese can trade with. The East Indies are already heavily civilized, and the Portuguese will be able to take advantage of that. India, my God, they have colonies in India, one of the wealthiest countries on the planet. So when you look at the difference between these two colonial empires, I mean, as Americans, we typically look at, well, who has most? Because that's obviously better. And we look at Spain like, oh, well, Spain's better. They have more. Done. Period. Did I ace this test yet? But when you really start to look at this, it's far more sophisticated than that. The Portuguese are spread out. They're diversified. They have colonies all over the place. If one falls away, are they still in good shape? Yeah. If one rises up in rebellion and kicks them out, are they still okay? Yeah. What about Spain? I mean, yeah. I mean, you've heard the expression, put all your eggs in one basket? Yes, you have? Maybe? It was a while ago? Okay. Well, did the Portuguese put all their eggs in one basket? Right. Right. They split it up over multiple baskets. So if you lose one, you're still okay. But for the Spanish, they've hung all their hopes on the Western Hemisphere. And so if they were to lose portions of this, like Nick was saying, it might very well turn into a domino effect, where because it's all connected, they could see the whole thing taken away. Stephen? It does happen. All right, so we took care of where are Portugal's colonies. We took care of where are Spain's colonies. Hannah? The Caribbean and the West Indies are the same thing. Why is Portugal so much more diversified? Nick?
Because the Pope gave them everything under the treaty, the line of demarcation.
Okay. So the Pope gave Portugal everything in the Eastern Hemisphere as part of the Treaty of Tordesillas. Now go back another step. Why did the Pope give that to Portugal? Eileen? They got there first. Right. It's a really easy answer to this question. Portugal got there first. Portugal started exploring first. Bartholomew Diaz gets around Africa. Vasco da Gama gets to India. Portugal is able to monopolize this area first. So by default, what's the only other place Spain can go? West. So that's why Portugal can be diversified, and it's why Spain can't. Spain has a lack of options now. The only place for Spain to colonize is over here. Does that make sense? Okay. So, how do the colonies resemble Europe? Now, how many of you guys, when you travel, you stay in a hotel or something like that, how many of you, when you get in the hotel, you unpack your suitcase and put all your stuff away in the dresser? Nobody? I mean, if you're going to be there for a few days, not like a one-night thing, but like if you're going to be there for 3, 4, 5 days, or do you always live out of your suitcase? Some of you do. Why do you unpack? So you can get comfortable. It makes it feel like home.
So you don't like wear the same thing for the next 3 days.
Right, so you don't wear the same clothes for the next 5 days. Right. For a lot of people, when they travel, they want traveling to feel like home. So they'll bring a lot of their personal things with them to make it feel like home. Maybe they'll bring their special pillow. Maybe they'll bring their little blanket. They'll bring a couple of their favorite snacks. Like they want it to feel like home, just in case they can't get the stuff they're used to over there. The Europeans are no different when they come to the New World. They want it to feel like home. There we go. Now the colors don't make sense, but that's all right. So when the Europeans show up, what are some things that they bring with them from home? Disease, quite by accident. But yes, they bring all of their contagious germs with them. It is. What else do they bring? What are some things they bring with them to make them feel more comfortable? Because it's not like they brought disease so everybody else could get sick so they could feel comfortable. What, Nick?
Large animals.
They brought large animals so that the same work could get done in the new world. Somewhere to worship and something to worship. They bring their God. They bring Christianity with them. And so they construct churches so they can continue to worship. They bring their Bibles. They erect crosses. They bring their religion to this new place. They bring with them an urban mentality. Did most people in the Americas live in big cities? No. Right, with the exception of a few. Most people throughout the Americas were still what? Hunter-gatherers or nomads or maybe beginning farming. Europeans brought with them the idea that people are supposed to live in cities. They bring with them what we consider to be a military ethic. When the Europeans get to the New World, do they assume that everybody is friendly? No. What do they assume?
They assume they're all hostile.
Right. They assume the exact opposite. They assume everybody is hostile. Are you guys watching that History Channel series, The Story of All of Us? Or am I the only one? Okay. Well, they did a great job with this one part. I actually don't like the series all that much as a whole, but they were talking about the early settlement at Jamestown. Just before the natives show up to help out. And they do this great job of showing just how terrified these Europeans were. I mean, they carry their guns with them all the time. The first thing they build, they build houses first, and then the second thing they build is a fence to surround the houses with. I mean, you see this mentality of fear. They are terrified of being in this new place. If they had locks on their doors, they probably would lock them. If they had a way to set a security system so an alarm would go off, they would probably have done it. If they could have set up a perimeter with barbed wire and landmines, they would have. They were afraid. And they feared everything in this new world. And so in order to make themselves feel more comfortable, what do you need to bring with you? Guns. You need to bring with you the idea of conquest. In order for them to feel safe, they had to conquer the land. They had to feel like it was theirs and that they were safe in it because they had removed any threat. Question?
Yes.
Okay.
Why do you not like theories?
I think they're over-dramatizing it. Which, again, I realize it's for mass consumption, so you got to find some way to get people excited about history, because as you guys have found, it's not always easy. I struggle with the fact that the guys that do a lot of the commentary are military experts, but they're military experts that are now expounding on all kinds of non-military things. So, like, they have an ex-Navy SEAL who's explaining about early farming. I'm like, I don't understand. But anyway.
You gotta get pumped up for all that farming.
Exactly.
You like landmines.
And he's like really intense about it. So he's like, you gotta go and get this land, you gotta plow it, and then you have food, and with food you have power. I'm like, really, dude? Drop and give me 10. No.
Yeah, give me 10.
All right, other things that they bring with them. They bring with them the concept of social hierarchies that they had back home. Back home they had rich, powerful nobles and poor, impoverished peasants. So, when you come to the New World, that's what you create. Is you create the same hierarchy that you had back home. Now, the people coming to the New World at first aren't terribly wealthy. But when they encounter the natives, what's their mentality?
They're poorer than us.
The natives are poorer than us. Thank God it finally happened. We're not poor anymore. We are now Nobles, we are now richer. You are now poorer. The social hierarchy still works. Guess what? We're the new rich folks. You're the new poor people. Get to work. When you travel, you bring a lot of baggage, both physical and mental. They're bringing with them their concept of how life should be and how society should be run. Do you think the natives had any concept of what was happening? Did they know any of this about Europeans? Didn't they already have their own social hierarchies and beliefs and cultures and things like that? Yeah. Europeans are going to bring this notion of slavery. This notion that I can make you work for me because I am more powerful. Not this cooperative, collaborative, like, hey, let's go do this together. But I can make you work, so I'm going to make you work, and if you don't, I will punish you. It's such a different mentality. And then once they bring all this other stuff, and once they get it all set up and running, they bring with them the same mentality, the same relationship between church and state that they had back in Europe. That the church and state coexist and share power, sometimes fight over power, but that this is how society should function. There should be political rulers, there should be religious rulers. We need them both. And so you see churches pop up across the New World, you see colonial governments pop up across the New World, and you see this power being shared between the two groups. So basically all we did was we threw Spain and Portugal down in the Xerox machine, we closed the lid, we hit copy, and we brought it over. With one exception, and this is a pretty minor exception. In the New World, you get to build your cities from scratch all at once. Back in Europe, Paris, Lisbon, London, Madrid, Seville, Rome, all of those cities had been built up over hundreds or thousands of years. They were built up a little bit at a time, kind of like Loudoun County. You go back 20 years, it was Tyson's and a little bit of Sterling and Leesburg. And so over time, little pockets grew here and there. One subdivision, another subdivision, another subdivision, slowly over time. And so what's the result for us here? Total chaos. If you're trying to get from Leesburg to Sterling, there's one road, Route 7. There are no back roads because they never connected all the subdivisions. In the New World, you have urban planning. You have a grid system. You guys ever see a map of Washington, D.C.?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, it's a whole bunch of north-south roads crisscrossed by a whole bunch of east-west roads. And there's a few diagonal roads. How much easier is that? So much. This is what I grew up with in the Midwest. All of our cities are on grids. All of them were planned ahead of time. If you live here and you want to get here, there's like 15 different ways you can go. There's no traffic problem. I can go this way. If it gets too trafficy, I can cut over. Here, I gotta go like wind around and come back up and drive 15 miles. Like, it's ridiculous. This is the one thing they bring to the New World that they did not have in Europe: urban planning. Cities laid out on a grid. And if you look at most of the major cities in the U.S., New York, Chicago, D.C., they're laid out on grids. Because it just makes sense. For those of you, because I can tell by a few of the faces you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm going to show you. Okay, this is a grid. Do you see it now?
I see all the diagonal streets.
North-south streets, east-west streets, a few large arteries that run on diagonals, but you can get off at any time and go on any of these other small streets. It makes sense. It's organized. It's methodical. That's what Europeans bring to the New World that they never got to have. If you ever travel in Europe, their cities don't look like this. Their cities are chaotic because they have 1,000-year-old roads that they then had to integrate with 500-year-old roads that they then had to integrate with 100-year-old roads that they then had to integrate with roads that they just built last year. It's a mess. That's why they like traffic circles so much. Yeah.
Why are these roads, was the pre-planned grid cities, did they eventually become specially designed for cars, or was
Yes.
it just?
Yeah. And so when you look at, well, and especially when you look at cities in the Midwest and the West Coast, by the time those were being built, we were in the 1800s. Not that we had automobiles at that point, but vehicle traffic, carriages and things like that was much more common than cities being built much earlier when foot traffic was the most common. That's what you see in a lot of European cities. You see very narrow streets because they were never meant for large vehicles because large vehicles never existed. And that's why it's scary when you're on those streets and you see a car coming down the road because you have this much space on either side of that car. And you're hoping the driver doesn't freak out, and you're hoping that you're thin enough that you can press yourself up against the wall and the car doesn't hit you. That's why it's fun to travel. Okay. All right, so we good here? Yes, ish, maybe, kind of? Paul?
Yes.
Okay, Paul says so. All right, 3 topics we're going to discuss in greater length. Forms of labor in the colonies, what they use the labor for, and what happens as a result of these kinds of labor. Got it? Good. And by now you know how the magic box works. Okay, the very first vocab word you need to know for this chapter, because it's going to come up a lot, is the word encomiendas. Encomiendas is a right. Encomiendas is a power. Encomiendas is not land. Encomiendas is the ability to use the people on the land as your labor. Is that too bright blue? Can't see it? Okay, we'll try it again. The hacienda is the land and the manor itself. Oh, come on.
Land and labor?
All right. The hacienda is the land and the manor house, the big estate. So the hacienda is the tangible thing. The encomiendas system is what gives the European settling on that land the right, the ability to use the natives as his labor. So the encomiendas is the power, the hacienda is the place. Encomiendas is the power to use the people as labor. The hacienda is the place where they will labor. Nick?
This is a lot like plantation agriculture in the United
This
States.
is the beginning of plantation
Did they
agriculture.
was there a name for the right to do plantation agriculture? Just like there's a name for the right to do hacienda?
That's it. That's where the idea starts. Because remember, the first people to come to the Western Hemisphere come to Central and South America. By the time people settle in North America, the United States, This idea has already long since been implemented, and so it's easy to copy. So plantation agriculture in the southern United States is based exactly on this model, because this model got a 100-year head start. Except there's a problem with this model. It's a social problem. Paul?
Why would the people who live there agree
Because they don't have guns. So it's not really agreement. And again, this is the beginning of slavery in the New World. The Europeans show up. They have the technological ability to control. They have the mindset that they need to control because of their combination of fear and sense of superiority. So again, you don't see them show up and go, oh wow, look at these new people, let's all be friends and work together. And I can learn from you and you can learn from me. They show up, they're like, huh, there's people here on my land that I just found 5 seconds ago. Get off my land. Like I said, it's a very different mentality. But there's a problem with it. The people coming to the New World are what kind of Europeans?
Selfish.
Selfish. All right, let me narrow it down for you. Upper class, middle class, or lower class? Lower and middle. Lower and middle. Small middle class. So these lower and middle class Europeans that come to the New World now own huge amounts of land. And they now own the labor on that land. What did they just become? Overnight, nobles. They just became feudal lords. Overnight, they went from being lower class Europeans, braving the oceans, probably dying, being eaten by a sea monster, to landing in a far, far away world with weird looking people and weird looking land. And the next day, they are feudal nobles running their own mini kingdoms with their own peasants and their big house and servants and wealth. Talk about a turnaround. Here's where the problem develops. Where is home for these Europeans? Where's home really, though? It's Europe. I mean, is there anything in the New World like Lisbon, like Seville, like Madrid? Is there any place in the New World that has the culture, the art, the entertainment, the food of where they came from? No. So where do they always secretly yearn to go back to? They want to go back home. What happens now when these hacienda owners come back to Europe?
They're jerk for it.
No, they're not. When they come back to Europe, they're now wealthy. They have wealth, they have land, they have slaves. What happens when they come back to Europe? You would think they're appreciated. They certainly act more arrogant because they're acting like what? Nobles. How do the nobles in Europe view the nobles from the Americas? They don't like them. They're like, you got to be joking. You think you're as good as me? I can trace my family's history back hundreds of years. Hundreds of years that we have been nobility. Hundreds of years that we have had these castles and these mansions, that we have had wealth and culture and prestige. And you think you go to some backwater, podunk, hillbilly part of the world, enslave a few random people that barely know anything, and you think you come back here and you're as good as me? You must be out of your mind. You are still a peasant. You see the problem? This New World encomienda system has created a false level of nobility that now is only noble in the New World. But they're not happy in the New World because the New World doesn't have all the cool stuff. Plus, in the New World, there's nobody to show off to. There's nobody to go up to and say, you always thought you were so much better than me. You always thought you had so much more stuff. Well, look at me now. Look how much I have. I'm richer than you are. Take that, fat old rich man. I'm the fat old rich man now. Right. So the problem is that from Spain's perspective, from Portugal's perspective, this is a disaster. You now have lower class people with all the trappings, all the stuff of upper class life, and therefore thinking they're just as good as the real upper class back in Europe. This is a catastrophe. So, they quickly end the practice of encomiendas. But it's too late. Because you come to the New World, there's no rules. You have all of this land and the technological superiority to enslave the locals. And you keep sending over lower and middle class people, guess what they're going to want? They're going to want to rise in society and benefit. Emily?
Why is this such a problem
Because they're not going to stay in the New World. Because they come from Europe. So like when you guys go off to college, if that's where you want to go. Let's say you go out of state. Let's say you decide, I don't want Virginia Tech and UVA and William and Mary and JMU. I want USC. I want Stanford. I want Boulder, Colorado. I want San Antonio, Texas. I want Orlando, Florida. I want to go overseas to study. Where is home? Home is here. And part of you will want to come back and see all the things that you used to know and that you grew up with because you have all those fond memories and emotional attachments. And part of you is going to want to come back so you can rub it in the faces of all the people you don't like. And say, look at me, I'm at school in Malibu, California, and you went to JMU? I went to school in Spain, and you think tech is cool? Look at my tan, look at my clothes, look at how much I learned in my class at my good school compared to you who thought William and Mary was awesome. Like, that's kind of a basic part of human nature. And so for these Europeans that come to the New World and make it rich, do you think they're content to stay in this place that has no big city culture, has no sophisticated level of entertainment? The New World doesn't have fancy museums and parties. They don't have coffee shops. They don't have all of the cool stuff that you would get if you were back in Europe. So where do they want to go? They want to go back to Europe. And that's where it's a problem. By the way, I didn't mean to knock any of those Virginia schools. They're all great. You should want to go there. Okay. I'm not even from Virginia. I don't care where you go to school. Honestly, I'd never even heard of most of these schools till I came into the state. So what I say doesn't mean anything. All right, so have we pretty well established what this system reminds you of? It's basically a carbon copy of what? Feudalism. Feudalism. Noble, up in his big house, peasants work in his field. Except here, the person up in the big house is what? A European peasant, and the person working the field is a native.
Who is also a peasant.
Who has now become a peasant. Here's a big question. How is religion used in this system? It is. It is absolutely integral. Sahil? Yep. Christianity will be used at length to support this system. Paul?
So if they're better because they think their religion is more.
And that's step one. They just think Christianity is a better religion than any of the native religions. They look at the native religions worshiping sun gods and trees and natural spirits and stuff. They're looking at them like, you must be stupid. I can't believe you believe in that. It's like still believing in the Easter Bunny. Are you a child? What's wrong with you? I'm just kidding. Easter Bunny's real. If you saw Rise of the Guardians, he's real. Here's the second part. What does Christianity say about slavery?
That's what they start interpreting it.
Good. And you have to be careful with this. Christianity says a lot about slavery. Slave and master shows up a lot in the Old and the New Testament. The problem is, how do you interpret it? Do you interpret it to mean that slavery is justified and even encouraged, that some people are better than others? Do you interpret it as sometimes it just happens, but we should try to correct it and love everybody? In this case, they use it as a justification to enslave the natives. Because our religion is superior, because our God is superior, and because our religious text tells us that slavery exists, then ipso facto, we are allowed to enslave these people.
So the people are living there, they do convert. Do they drop it?
Nope, it's too late for that, because what will quickly happen right after we use religion to justify this is that we will create a secondary justification, race. And that since you look different from me, that also justifies me in enslaving you because you are less of a person. Yeah.
Were there any people who were able to convert to Christianity before they started basing it on race?
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough call. Maybe. But that would have a whole lot, it would be very, very localized. There may have been some that converted and became part of the ruling class, but I don't think it was a lot. Emily or Tarina, you guys had questions? Okay. Okay.
Wouldn't it be like what you said before, like with religion, they're not going to just convert out of nowhere because they've been following one religion and they're not going to.
Exactly. Yeah, conversion doesn't happen quickly because you followed something your whole life. And it's not like you wake up one day and be like, I'm just going to get rid of all that. I don't really think any of those things anymore. It's Tuesday. I'm going to try something new. Yeah, that doesn't really happen. Clothes, yes. Religion, no. So let me jump over real quick to this whole morality of slavery, that worksheet that you guys did last class with the sub. And let me just give you the two sides with their direct quotations, the things that they said about each issue. So you have two people that have a literal debate about this. Bartolomé de las Casas, who used to be a conquistador and then finds God. And then Juan Gines de Sepulveda, who once a conqueror, always a conqueror. And these gentlemen will have an actual debate back in Spain about the morality of slavery and whether or not it is justifiable to conquer and enslave these people. And Bartolomé de las Casas will say, Aristotle's definition of the barbarian and the natural slave did not apply to the Indians, who are fully capable of reason and should be brought to Christianity without force or coercion. In other words, these are equal human beings who still deserve to be exposed to a religion that Europeans obviously believe to be true, but without force or coercion. We should be able to live alongside each other, expose them to our beliefs, but not force them to accept them, and not punish them if they don't. So that's the one side. That's the side that says, these are good people, let's not hurt them. On the other side, Señor Sepulveda says, those whose condition is such that their function is the use of their bodies, and nothing better can be expected of them, those, I say, are slaves of nature. It is better for them to be ruled thus. The natives are as children to parents, as women are to men, as cruel people are from mild people. In other words, we are superior to them on so many levels, and they are inferior to us on so many levels, that simply by their basic human nature, the only thing that could be expected of them is to be our slaves. They are not our equals, and they are not capable of being our equals. So why should we pretend they are and treat them that way? Emily?
What was it about
That's a great question. What is it about the Indians that made him see them that way? Honestly, the simplest answer I can give you is the Indians don't think the way that he does. The Indians don't seem to be materialistic. The Indians don't seem to feel the need to parade around fully clothed in fancy dress. The Indians have not developed the kinds of cities and buildings that Europeans equate with being civilized. They don't speak the right language. They don't worship the right God. And that's kind of his checklist. If you're like me, then you're equal to me. If you're not like me, then you better be really impressive, buddy, because otherwise you don't make the cut. Any other thoughts or questions about the things these guys are saying? Nick?
Who won?
Well, slavery persists in the New World until the 1800s, so what's your guess? Sepulveda. And it's not so much that he won, it's just that nobody really agreed with De las Casas. It was kind of the, yeah, it would be nice if we could be nice to everybody, but nah. Right. Ladies, no comments on the as women are to men line? Alana?
Well, nothing they can do about it.
Right. Right. But it's interesting, again, not that we're going to argue whether or not he's right or wrong, but just how oversimplified his worldview is. That there is such a crystal clear hierarchy for so many parts of society. It's not just, white men and, native men. It's men and women. It's temperaments. It's in his worldview and the worldview of many other Europeans, there is a clear, preferred, superior human. And it is a white Christian male. And he is fundamentally better than all other forms of humanity. He is superior to the white Christian female. He is superior to the Arab Muslim male. He is superior to the Indian Hindu female. He is better than everybody, and as such, he has tremendous authority over all people. I mean, it is, I don't even know what the right word is, but it is such a unique worldview. I mean, imagine seeing the world through those eyes. Imagine seeing other people through that mindset. I'm better than you, 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 better than you. I don't know, it's... All right, Michael and I don't know. We'll have to work that one out. I'm older and taller. How about that? I still win. Nick?
When did the Europeans abandon this mindset now?
Ooh, great question. When did Europeans abandon this mindset and why? Anybody want to lob out an answer? They never did? I mean, don't we still see elements of this today? Not strictly European, but that there are lots of people in the world that would take this viewpoint on a number of issues. That there are simply people in the world that are not as good as me and therefore should not be treated as my equal. Don't we still see that today? Whether it's racism or ethnocentrism, which is ethnic racism basically, or sexism. I mean, don't we still see this? So Nick, you bring up a great question. When do they stop thinking this way? And it's probably not fair to lump all Europeans into this category because obviously there's at least one who disagrees with him. And if there's one, there's probably more. But have we ever reached a point where nobody thinks this way? I don't think so.
I'm just asking, when did Europeans as a whole abandon the philosophy?
Never. Some Europeans never had it to begin with. Some Europeans slowly changed their minds over time. Some Europeans, some Americans, some Russians, some Chinese people, whatever, still have this viewpoint today. So there's no political agenda behind it other than ending slavery.
Stop being a political agenda.
Well, slavery ends in the early to mid-late 1800s, depending on which country we're talking about. But that doesn't change the mentality. It just makes slavery illegal. So you're asking a much bigger question than just laws. All right, so coming back to this real quick, a little bit more straightforward. Uses of this labor. Now that you have this encomiendas system that allows you to enslave all these natives, what do you use them for? Well, the answer is pretty much whatever you want. But what's the fundamental goal in the New World if you're European? Make money. Get rich. So you are going to use this labor in the most lucrative areas possible. So mine gold and silver. And we already talked about the mine of Potosi a little bit, which again, I hope you'll watch that video on the Vision page about the mine itself because it's really pretty unique. Now, if you don't happen to have gold and silver where you are, you obviously can't do mining. But if you have lots of land available, you could at least do some farming. Now, you're probably not going to make a ton of money growing wheat. You need to grow cash crops, which I know is a phrase you've heard before, but maybe just never stopped to really think about. What is a cash crop?
Crop you can make a lot of money on.
It's a crop you can make a lot of money on. Why?
Because it has some sort of
Good. It has some sort of admirable quality or it is in limited supply.
Good. Highly valuable, highly desirable, and not easily available in all parts of the world. It's also typically not something that you can consume for survival. You know, we talked about way back with the Neolithic Revolution. The very first farmers, why were they growing food instead of hunting it? All right, it seemed like it might be less time consuming, but the focus was survival. They were growing crops that they could eat, so they didn't have to hunt animals they could eat. When you grow cash crops, you are not growing something for survival. You are not growing something for sustenance. You are growing something for profit. And so you're going to go about this with a very different mentality. You're going to go about this with a business mindset instead of a survival mindset. Because if you're growing sugarcane or tobacco or cotton, you can't eat those and live. You are growing those to sell in order to make money, a portion of which you will probably then use to buy the food that you need for survival. And then hopefully there's enough after that to make you a profit. That's what we mean when we talk about cash crops. is you are using all of this land that would normally be used to grow food crops. You're using this land for something else. Emily? Well, they're not using all the land. And many times they would set aside a small amount of acreage to grow wheat or corn or whatever, because you do want food close at hand. But some plantations will be entirely disposed towards cash crops. And then other land that isn't, that doesn't have the right soil conditions or climate or whatever, will get the task of growing wheat or corn or potatoes or whatever. I mean, it's just as, stable, because people have to eat. But what's going to make you more money? Growing potatoes or growing tobacco? Right, the price per plant is going to be much higher for tobacco. Unless there's a food shortage, right. Now, here's the issue, is that as it's just Spain and Portugal in the New World, who's making lots and lots of money? Spain and Portugal and nobody else. But what happens then when England or France or the Dutch start coming to the Western Hemisphere and sniping off pieces of land?
They start making prices lower because more stuff is being imported.
Right. They increase the number of goods being created. More goods makes it not as rare, which makes prices go down, which means everybody makes less.
So, you know how you said that the nobles in the new land, they go back to Europe and they're still peasants? So when the people from Europe come over to the New World, aren't they powerful in their own way because they're nobles there anymore, I think?
Yeah.
So when the people come, why don't they just be like, I have to overpower you?
Like the nobles from Europe come to the New World?
Yeah, the nobles from Europe.
Because the nobles from Europe don't really want to come to the New World. Okay. Now, what happens when prices drop on these cash crops? What do you do if this is your business? Give up?
You grow something new.
You make more. Again, basic logic says if I am losing money, what's the easiest way to make more money? Make more of the stuff. Have more product. Now, what do you need to grow more product? More land and more people, more slaves. So what does this do to the slave trade? It ratchets it up. What does this do to the conquest of the land? We need more. What does that do to prices? It drives them lower because now there's even more being produced. Which means if you are the individual plantation owner, what's your solution? Make more. More land, more slaves.
So it's basically a downward spiral.
It's a vicious circle. Just keeps going round and round and round. That's what makes it a vicious circle. And again, this is the problem with not understanding economics, is the thing that makes the most sense to the individual has what effect on the whole? The exact opposite. What would have been the best case scenario here to solve the problem? Destroy a whole bunch of things and or find a brand new crop. But assuming we couldn't find a brand new cash crop that people wanted, the best thing that could have happened was for a few plantation owners to voluntarily go out of business and then find somebody that would agree to take care of them.
Or go back to Europe.
Right. But are any of those people going to do that?
No.
I'm going to close up my shop because it's in the best interest of everybody else. No, they're not going to do that.
Sounds very communist, like what they had in the Soviet Union.
And that's why economic problems are so tricky to solve, is because typically the best thing for the individual is the worst thing for the group. And the best thing for the group is oftentimes the worst thing for the individual. That's why economics is so fun. Okay, so outcomes of all this at the end of the day. Who figured out what castas were when you read the book? I'm going to pretend Nick's not here, so somebody else is going to have to answer. What are castas? Michael, do you know what castas are? No. Does anybody know what castas are?
Is it
Hi, I'm not here. I know.
categorizing racial origin?
What is it?
Categorizing people,
Categorizing racial origins. Good. Do you know what that means?
like putting people in levels or whatever by their race.
That's exactly right. Putting people in different levels in society based on their race. So, your basic social hierarchy pyramid. Who's at the top? You can't say white people. We have to specify. White people
Born in Europe.
White people that were originally born in Europe. Peninsulares. That's an N, by the way. Peninsulares. People from where? Which peninsula? The Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. People from the Iberian Peninsula who came to the New World. Pure European. The Peninsulares will be at the top of the hierarchy. Now, fast forward. The Peninsulare gets to the New World. He sets up his hacienda. He's living here a while. He's been here 5-10 years. What's missing from his life? A woman. Let's say he brought a wife with him from Europe, and they have a kid. What does that kid look like? He's white. What does he look like genetically? He's European. So he goes here, right?
No, because
No. Why not?
because they were abusing their slave trade, so he could have some sort of non-European born.
Nope. Has nothing to do with blood. It has everything to do with where they are growing up. So, for example, let's say that we're actually living in Manhattan right now, upscale New York City. And let's say that your parents are hedge fund managers and corporate CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Wealthy, wealthy people. Let's say this is actually a private elite prep school, and you're all wearing snazzy school uniforms. Totally. And now let's say that one day in the middle of your middle school career, your elite, upper crust, high society parents in Manhattan decide they've had enough of it and they want to move to Morgantown, West Virginia. They want to get away, they want to get out in the country.
Great place to retire.
And so they take you with them. And so you finish middle school and you go to high school outside of Morgantown, West Virginia.
Would this be the whole class moving at once? Or
No, just you. Just you. Nick, you're gone. Your successful, wealthy, sophisticated parents are now moving to the country. And you will spend the remainder of middle school and all of high school in West Virginia schools. But your senior year, your family decides, we're going to go back and visit Manhattan. We miss the skyline of New York. We miss New York at night. We miss New York-style pizza, which is vastly inferior to Chicago-style pizza, but that's okay. We miss New York. We miss the art museum. We miss the opera. We miss the Broadway. We miss Times Square. We miss New York. We want to go back and visit. And so you get to come back your senior year. And you drop in and you visit all your old classmates at this elite prep school with all the snazzy uniforms. And you walk in the door and you say, howdy, y'all. How you doing? And you all do what? Like, seriously? Children of Europeans born in the New World will never be viewed as full-blooded, normal Europeans because they're growing up in the sticks. And again, I love West Virginia. That's where my in-laws live. They're great people. I love it. But from the stereotypical European view, these are not pure Spaniards. These are corrupted, backwoods, redneck, hillbilly Spaniards. Yep. These are pure white, but grew up in a different place, away from the culture of Spain, away from the language of Spain. They're speaking redneck Spanish. I don't know what y'all is in Spanish, but that's what they're saying. Emily? Well, social hierarchy existed in Europe, but it was based on what? Wealth and power. What we're going to see here is it's based on something else entirely. Because the people in Europe look down on the New World. They think it's a joke. They think it's trashy. They think it's rugged and unsophisticated and not the same as Europe. And again, from their standpoint, there's no opera. There's no museum. There's no culture in the New World. The New World for them is a bunch of, untamed wilderness with half-naked savages running around. How could that possibly be the same as the culture of Lisbon and Madrid and Seville and Barcelona, or Barcelona, as they say there? It's weird, man. It takes some getting used to. You hear people say Barcelona, and you're like, really? That's funny. All right, so we have white and white, but not the same. After that, we have a group called the Mestizos, because sometimes this guy, the Peninsulare, comes to the New World and doesn't have a wife. So where does he get his woman?
He steals a native woman.
You don't steal. It's not stealing if he owns her.
Oh! Okay. So
Remember, the encomienda system, and again, that comes out pretty harsh, doesn't it? But that's the encomienda system. And again, we're not sending a whole bunch of really sophisticated, well-mannered Europeans over. So the mestizos will be the half-white, half-native descendants of Peninsulares and native, oops, that's in the wrong spot, and native slaves. I'm getting there. Now, the Europeans find out very quickly that the natives do not make good slaves for 3 reasons. Reason number 1. All right, there's a language barrier, obviously, but that's going to be true of all of this. Many of them are dying from disease, and the longer they're around Europeans, the more of them die from disease. So disease is one reason why they don't make good slaves. Reason number 2, what are most natives doing to survive prior to Europeans showing up? They're hunter-gatherers. Now, with a language barrier, if you give a hunter-gatherer a farming implement, are they going to know what to do with it? Right, to stab it? Like, you want me to go kill a deer with this? This does not look like a deer killing tool. This looks like a hoe. You want me to get up to the deer and that's not going to work. So how do you explain to this native who has never farmed a day in his life how to farm? Especially when he doesn't like you because you're beating him. So that's reason number 2. Reason number 3, the natives know where they are. And the minute your back is turned, they're going to decide, you know what, being a slave sucks, I'm going to run away. And they know where to go. So, disease, don't know how to farm, know how to run away. You flip this around, and these are the exact 3 reasons why Africans become great slaves in the New World for Europeans. Resistant to disease because they are already exposed to old world diseases. Many of them are from agricultural societies, and they don't know where they are because you just took them across an entire ocean from their homeland. I'm going to come back to that in 30 seconds. So once Africans are in the New World, sometimes hang on. Yeah, I think so. Maybe it has one. I don't know. I can't spell. Sometimes peninsulares and African women will have children, which creates another casta, mulatto, half white, half black. Now, Tarina, you made an outstanding observation. What was it? Africans are higher than natives, which is weird because as we've started down this hierarchy, what have we seen? Over the first 4 levels, what's the trend? Whiteness. Over the first 4 levels, you get progressively less white. Pure-blooded European, genetically pure-blooded, but you're growing up in the sticks. Half white, half native, so from a skin tone standpoint, you're tan. Half white, half black, so you're darker. So over the first 4 levels, it's all about skin tone. Doesn't this seem weird?
Is it because the Africans will be under the control of the white?
Nope, they're both under control.
Okay.
Paul? Why, not really hate. It's not about hate.
Isn't it that the natives, like they keep to themselves in a way, like they don't,
Getting closer.
Less
Neha?
because like the Africans are used
It's all about money. The Africans are more productive. Remember, 3 reasons why natives are bad slaves are the same 3 reasons why Africans are good slaves. So here we make a philosophical revision to our hierarchy and flip the last 2 levels based entirely on usefulness, because let's be honest, the people up here could care less about either of these groups. Nick?
With this hierarchy, if you had native slaves and African slaves on the same plantation, or on the same hacienda, would you have where the African slaves could issue orders to the native slaves?
No.
Or teach them?
No, but African slaves might be treated slightly better. Tarina?
why do they marry the black people?
It's not marrying.
It's not marrying, it's raping.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So then were the kids of the people, were they like also slaves?
Sometimes. Guys, one of the last things you need to understand is that this line is really thick. This line is really thick. In reality, it probably looks a whole lot more. Actually, I think I locked all those together. Never mind, that won't work. But if we dragged all this down like 6 feet, that's the gap in society between these and everybody else. Alana? Because they're more white. Why are these higher than those? Because they're more white. They look more like, yep, exactly. Nick?
So what could mestizos and mulattoes do if they were so far down?
Okay, this is the last thing I need you to see. Same thing we just talked about, except spelled correctly, so I apologize for any mistakes I made on the last one. This is what I need you to see. Early on, these subgroups are not a huge issue because there aren't many of them. The first few generations of colonization, you don't have opportunities for this to really get messy. But add a century to it, and what you see is that 35 to 40% of the entire population comes from this group. In 1650, this part of the population is 5 to 10%. In 1750, this part of the population is 35 to 40%. That's when it becomes an issue. Now, as you progress through generations, guess what else happens? This falls apart. Because what happens now if a Creole has a child with a mestizo? What happens if a Creole has a child with a mulatto? It's not going to look like a mestizo, so we can't just split the difference. What happens if a mestizo has a child with a slave? This thing falls apart very quickly, and so what you find is that until slavery is outlawed, your skin tone is your meal ticket. The lighter your skin tone is, the easier access you have to more opportunities in society. If you happen to be a child of a peninsulare and a slave, and you just happen to get lighter skin than the next mulatto who has very dark skin, guess what? You're going to be higher in society. If you happen to be the child of a peninsulare and a native and come out with very dark skin, then guess what? You might be mistaken for a mulatto or even a slave. So the last thing I need you to understand is that this system is broken really quick. But they perpetuate it because of the mindset that these people are better. Very last thing for you to get. Who has the most reason to be really ticked off in this hierarchy? No.
The mistake, Creole.
Why?
Because they are completely European, but what? But they get a lot of crap for not having been born and raised in Europe. The Creoles will be the ones that lead the revolutions in Latin America to get their independence from Spain and Portugal. Because they will be the ones that are never treated the way that they feel they deserve to be treated. Because they are full-blooded Europeans, and yet they're segregated against as much as everybody else, just never so harshly.
Whereas the slaves and natives might not get used to it all the time.
Well, they don't get used to it. They just don't have the ability to do anything.
They expect it.
Well, not even...